Because the truth is, businesses are struggling and people want to know what's available to help them right now. Hi friends, I'm Jennifer from the Corporate Canuck, and tonight I'm doing a little bit of a different video because I sat down actually to shoot something totally different. I have a bunch of tax stuff that I want to do coming up, but with how the world is shifting and changing, I thought you, fellow business owners, may want to know more about the resources that are available to you, both through our government and private financing, that can help you during this time of challenge to your business. One thing I'll say right off the bat is that this situation is evolving. So I'm going to do my best to give you the information I have that is current as of right now, but make sure you're checking government links and programs as these resources may continue to evolve and change. And I'm going to drop a link in the description below to my blog, which has all of these links in one handy place. Now, when we look at what is available to you right now as a business owner, it essentially breaks down into three different types of support. So there are things like government subsidies and grants. There is financing and different ways of tapping into financing. And then there is also special savings programs, whether it's through your bank or through the government itself. And so what I want to do today is walk through the key features of each of those, what you need to apply, and how you can get started really right now. Let's talk financing. So when I say financing, really what I mean is loans. And what has happened in this time of crisis and upheaval is that the government has partnered with different financial institutions and different financial organizations to deliver a more diverse, easily accessible loan program for small business owners and corporations. So really the big one that we're focusing on is the Canada Emergency Business Account, or CEBA. And basically what it is a one-time lump sum of $40,000. And this can be used for any part of your normal business operations. Now, it can't be used for things like shareholder dividends or if you wanted to suddenly invest in new equipment. No, it's really designed to meet the needs right now that you're suffering during this time of loss. So it's a $40,000 loan. And the great part is that it's actually interest-free for the first almost 2 years. So you can continue on and have that loan interest-free up until December of 2022. And then depending on who you bank with, it will normally be turned over into a different kind of low interest term loan, that kind of thing. Now, there are a few things to bear in mind before applying for the Canada Emergency Business Account. And the first one is that you have to have had an existing payroll account. So a government account ending with RP, 0001, 002, that kind of thing. You need to have had that in place before the COVID crisis started in mid-March. You can't suddenly just, I'm going to apply for it. Because what they're also looking at is that you've had a minimum payroll from 2019 between $20,000 up to $1.5 million in payroll. And you can find that number on what is called your T4 summary. So when you've submitted your T4 slips for the 2019 year, it's basically kind of like a cover page or a summary of all the T4 slips that you submitted. So if you're using software, you should be able to find it in any of those payroll or tax docs. If you use an accountant or a service, just call them up and get it, or you can go into your My Business account on CRA and download that information from there. But you will need to have your payroll number, and you will need to be able to verify and confirm that you paid between $20,000 up to $1.5 million in payroll in 2019. So now, as I said before, it is interest-free up until December 2022. That's really hard to say, 2022. But there's also an extra perk that if you have paid the loan in full, so you've made all the principal payments and paid that money back in full by the end of 2022, you'll actually get a 10% debt forgiveness. So that is a fantastic option, if you haven't used all of it or you're able to do so, and then just absorb even more savings from that loan option. To apply for the Canada Emergency Business Account, you can actually do it online through most of the big banks and credit unions. Most of them now have a COVID-19 tab or help section on their website. So you should be able to log in, apply online, and it will walk you through all of the information required. One thing that I do recommend, I did mention it earlier, is to review the terms of the loan and what it can actually be used for. So it can't be used for things like paying dividends to shareholders or to suddenly acquire something crazy and new for your business. It's really to support the losses and offset those losses that you've had over the past few weeks and months, and hopefully keep your business thriving and surviving through this time of crisis. So the next little piece of this puzzle is another financing option, but it's one that the government has partnered with other organizations to deliver. So there is what's called a Business Credit Availability Program, BCAP, and it provides additional financing, loans, and things like that, support through the Business Development Bank of Canada, BDC, as well as Export Development Canada. And both of those are focused on different types of businesses. So check out those sites if you want more information. But it is an option too if you're looking for a larger size loan. For example, the loans right now look like they're available depending on, the state of your business and all those kind of things, available up to 6.25 million. So if you run a larger business and you may need more access to financing to carry you through this next period, that may be a resource that is available to you. Now, it doesn't have that sweet perk of being interest-free until 2022, but most of the loans that I've looked at are actually interest-free for at least the first 12 months and offer a longer repayment period of up to 10 years. So again, may be useful if you're not eligible for the emergency business fund or if you just need access to a bigger loan and financing. And the third program that I wanted to talk about is the Indigenous Business Support. So again, the Government of Canada has partnered with different Aboriginal financed institutions to deliver funding specific to Aboriginal communities and businesses. So if that does apply to you and your situation, make sure that you're checking in with your local banking support and seeing what specific options may be available to you. Now, the next topic I want to dive into is government subsidies. And this is a huge conversation in all of my finance groups and small business organizations I'm part of. And the big one, the really big one that I think every business should be looking at right now to see if they're eligible is the emergency wage subsidy. So the first step with the emergency wage subsidy is to look at, are you eligible? And what the government is assessing that on is if you've had a loss in revenue. And so we start right now by looking at March, and they're evaluating March, April, and May. So for March, you would need to show that there has been a revenue drop of 15% if you're applying right now. And if you are approved for that first period, you are automatically approved for the following two. And there's actually two different approaches that you can use to assess if your business has been impacted and makes you eligible for the emergency wage subsidy. So the first one is to look at the revenues in March for 2020 and look at the revenues in March for 2019 and compare them. And if you've had at least a 15% drop in revenue, you'll be able to apply for this emergency wage subsidy. So again, you're looking and comparing basically month to month, but different years. So March 2020, March 2019, was there a drop? Now, the government has come out and revised these guidelines to give you a second option because they realize that businesses can grow over time, and especially things like startup or high growth industries may continue to see boom month after month, but are still affected by the drop in revenue. So the other option is to take January, February, figure out the average of those 2 months and compare it to March. So you'd be looking at January, February 2020, calculating the average, looking at your March revenue and seeing if you have that 15% decrease. So April comes around. If you have used January, February average to figure out your loss in revenue, then you would also use January, February average to figure out loss in April. And again, if you've used the year over year comparison, you'd look at April 2020 and compare it to April 2019. So this is where you do need to take a little bit of time. It's also a great excuse to get those books all caught up if you're behind on your bookkeeping. You'll need to be able to do this because at some point you will need to prove these numbers to the CRA for tax purposes and validation purposes. So take a look right now, figure out step one, are you eligible? Can you prove a loss of revenue, either method 1, month to month, or method 2, the average of January, February 2020? So let's say you've gone ahead, you've done the paperwork. Yes, you're good to go. You're eligible for this funding. What does it look like? Basically, what it works out to be is 75% of eligible wages paid. So that's your employees, people who are on your payroll. Again, we're not including shareholder directors who are getting dividends. We're not including contractors. This is just to deal with employees. And so there is a maximum of $847 per week you can get as a subsidy. So if somebody makes $1,000, they can still only get that subsidy up to, $847 per week, or basically 75% up to a maximum of $847. And depending on your situation, perhaps you have employees on furlough, so they've been laid off, but you've still been paying their wages. You may actually be able to claim a refund on employer portion of taxes. So that's the employer portion that you've paid to match CPP, as well as to the 1.4 times what you would pay to match EI, but matching at 1.4 times, which is the normal calculation for payroll remittances. So it's worthwhile to look into that. Again, a little bit more paperwork, but it's worth it. The goal of these programs is to keep people working. And they're very useful to us as a business right now. And just so you know, the program is available right now for a 12-week period. So going from March 15th all the way through till June 6th. And again, pending updates as the situation evolves. One thing I will mention, and I will pop it onto the webpage that I'm developing, is the CRA has actually come out with a great calculator. So you can go in and type out all of that information and have that benefit calculated for you, so you know exactly what you need to put on the form when you apply. Now, if you're keen on getting started on this, applications do open on April 27th. You can apply through the My Business account online with CRA. If you're working regularly with an accountant or a bookkeeper, they may have access to your account as well too. So they may be able to go on and file that on your behalf, depending on the authorization that you set up. And the other option is that there will be an online form available through the CRA website. So check it out. One of the earliest programs that we saw as an emergency response was something called the 10% wage subsidy. Now that has it's not been phased out. It's still available to you in certain circumstances, but it's important to know that anything that you receive through the 10% wage subsidy is deducted off of that big emergency wage subsidy, the subsidy you get for weekly wages. So it's worthwhile to look at the emergency wage subsidy first, and then if for some reason you're not able to apply for it, maybe then this 10% wage subsidy will apply to you. Basically what it is, it's a program to reduce the amount of taxes you pay when you pay your payroll remittance. So the 10% wage subsidy takes 10% of gross wages paid, so 10% of what you pay, salary or hourly workers, and then that amount from the wage gets subtracted off of the tax portion on your payroll remittance. So when you send in your payroll remittance, for a lot of us, it's monthly. There are different sections on that form. There's EI, there's CPP, and there's income tax. Now, you can only reduce the income tax portion. That's really important to note. You can't reduce the CPP and you cannot reduce the EI portion, but you can reduce that tax portion. And the great thing is if, the 10% of your wage exceeds what you're supposed to send in for taxes, that amount can actually carry forward. Now, here's the thing. You don't have to apply right now. I mean, most businesses are trying to manage cash flow, so it's kind of a good idea to do it now. But you will be able to apply and reconcile for it at the end of the year as well. So if it's something that's not available to you right now for whatever reason, and you do want to assess at a later date, you'll be able to do it retroactively, kind of when you file your year-end payroll reports. Now, it is really important to note with both of these programs that you can apply through the My Business account online on the CRA website, and as well keep track of this information because these subsidies are considered taxable income, meaning at some point in time you will have to pay taxes on it. It's not just free money that shows up. So just bear that in mind when you're evaluating and assessing what might be the right solution for you and your business right now. One other area of government funding and subsidies that was very recently announced, is the Canada Emergency Commercial Rent Assistance, CECRA. This is huge because this was a lot of feedback that we had was it's great if you have payroll, but even without having payroll and maybe you had to lay all of your employees off, you still have to pay your rent. So the government has been working with all of the individual provinces because every province manages rent relationships and contracts a little bit differently. But because of that, the federal government has coordinated with provincial governments to allow up to 75% of your rent covered and or postponed. And so provincial governments will be reaching out and working with commercial landlords because they have different guidelines they need to follow, and then the tenants will have different guidelines they need to follow. But just know that this is coming up hopefully very soon, and they're looking at covering the months of April, May, and June for rent support. So we've covered a lot. We've covered financing, we've covered subsidies, and it's all well and good. But what if you are just self-employed? You don't have people on payroll, or you're a contractor or occasional contractor or employee plus contractor. What about that situation? That's where you need to start looking on what's available to you on the personal side of things. And primarily, that is the Canada Emergency Response Benefit, the CERB. So that's a program that most of us are familiar with. There's lots of information and lots of updates happening with that program. But one of the really exciting updates was that the eligibility rules have changed so that you are allowed to earn up to $1,000 gross income and still be eligible for the benefit. And this was, of course, in response to people who still had part-time work, or maybe they lost some of their clients, but not all of them. But just know that if you are not incorporated, you do not have a payroll account, it's just you running your own thing, you're going to want to look at the personal benefits. And those you're probably going to be eligible for those first versus some of these other things like wage subsidy and big grant programs. But again, everything is going to be a little bit unique depending on your individual situation. So take the time now, look through the links provided and see what may actually work for you. Okay, so we're almost there. We're on our last little section and we're going to talk about savings. Now, this isn't necessarily a savings account you get through a bank, but different savings programs that may be available to you as a resource. So the first thing that we want to get into is GST HST. So if you have a GST HST number, you are a regular remitter. The government has said that for amounts that are normally due from March 27th until June 30th, those payments are now all due June 30th. Now, for most of us, especially as quarterly remitters, there's a lot of tax returns that are actually due April 30th. So the government has said you can defer those payments, that anything you have due, until June 30th. So it gives you a couple of extra months. Now, the big topic of discussion that people are not quite getting is, yes, you do have to file those returns on time, meaning you have to submit that information like you normally would. So if you are a quarterly remitter on a normal January, December calendar year, you would normally have January through March as your first period, your quarter one, collect all that information and file that return and pay it by April 30th. So now you can defer that payment but you still want to file that return, and they want you to do that. So, obviously a lot going on in the world right now, but take the time to get your ducks in a row and get that information sent in so you could take advantage of that savings program. And the other piece of that tax puzzle has to do with income taxes. So for us, normal human beings who might be employees, the individual tax return deadline has been extended to June 1st. If you are self-employed, so the only income you have is self-employed income, whether you're a self-employed, contractor, sole proprietor, and you run on that January to December, that's your business year, your tax return and all that information is still due June 15th. But they are allowing a little bit of extra time to make payments. So if you were normally having to make any payments between March 18th all the way up to August 31st, you can now defer all of those payments to August 31st, including installment payments. So this is a big savings. And again, same things apply. They still want you to file those tax returns. So if you are an individual, make sure you're filing by June 1st. If you are self-employed or a contractor, make sure you're filing by June 15th, but you just get that extra little bit of time to pay the amounts that may become due. Now, if you are a corporation, there is a little bit of an extension. So if you have a corporate tax return payment that is normally due between March 18th and June 1st, they've extended that payment window until June 1st. So again, for corporations who would normally have a filing and payment date between March 18th, June 1st, you have been extended until June 1st. And again, these are all current as of today, but make sure that you're checking the CRA website for any potential updates on this. And the last little section I have here is actually to do with savings that may be available to you depending on who you bank with. And so it's kind of a hybrid of personal plus business, but a lot of banks are recognizing that their customers and small businesses are impacted. And so they're coming up with solutions to kind of help us during this time of transition. And for a lot of banks, that includes deferral periods, meaning that you may be able to make principal only payments on certain things like credit cards or your mortgages. And now, depending on what the deferral plan is, interest may still build. For example, in the case of credit cards, the interest will still build, but you won't actually have to pay it up to 6 months. And so this is pretty standard now for a lot of what we call the big banks. So the big five: Royal, Scotia, TD, CIBC, Bank of Montreal. I've seen it with credit unions. So it's worthwhile to look at who you bank with and what may be available to you. But the things that I've seen that are pretty common have been deferrals for things like mortgages, credit cards, installment loans, and auto loans. And then you'll need to connect with your bank to see if will you still be required to pay interest, or can you only pay principal only payments up to a certain time frame? And for most of it, it's been about 6 months. And the other thing that I've seen with credit cards specifically is that banks have also offered a reduction. If you are on this deferral plan, they've offered a reduction on the interest rate that will continue to accrue as you go through and defer those payments. So worthwhile to either check online. Some of them you can apply for this automatically. Others require getting on a phone call, and it's busy, but jump on a phone call and talk through your banking rep and see what options may be available for you. And the other side of that with the banking thing is for businesses, some banks are offering term debt to interest only debt up to 6 months, meaning that you won't have to make those principal payments for a certain amount of time, that you would just pay interest, which may be helpful to you depending on what type of financing you have for your business. And that probably will require you talking to a representative at your bank. So there you have it. A little snapshot of some resources that may be available to you as a Canadian small business during this time of COVID-19 crisis. If you've enjoyed this video, if you've taken something important away today, please consider giving it a like, a thumbs up, because actually by hitting that like button, you're telling these magical internet algorithms that this content is actually useful. And so it will help get the message and information in front of other small business owners like yourself. So thank you so much for joining me today. And, I know this is a challenging time. We are facing unprecedented circumstances and challenges. And it's also a really important time to step back and take stock in your business. Look at what's working, what may need to shift to move forward, and rely on each other and support each other, because united we are strong. So I wish you all the best, and we'll chat again soon.